The night was quiet, too quiet for a broken world. The stars above were sharp and cold, looking down on ruins that had no life left in them. The wind moved across the empty plains and carried the smell of metal and dust. A lone human sat inside. An abandoned shelter, his fire weak and his mind restless. He had been living like this for many months, alone in a place where nothing grew, where no voice answered back, where each day was the same as the last. His name was Daniel, and he had once been part of a larger colony.
Ow.
But that colony had burned. When the war came, now only he remained, like a ghost among wreckage, surviving on scraps and silence. He thought the world had forgotten him, and he had nearly forgotten the sound of another being's voice. Then, deep in the night, his old radio crackled to life. For a long time it had been nothing but static, just a faint hiss that reminded him of the past. But now, out of the silence, there came a broken signal. It was not in English, not in any human tongue, but the words were filled with pain and urgency. A voice, trembling and thin, repeated the same call again and again, like someone too desperate to stop. He leaned close, heart beating fast, and, though he could not understand the language, he felt the fear inside it. It was the voice of someone alone, someone afraid, someone reaching out across the dark. He froze, unsure if it was real, unsure if loneliness had finally broken his mind. But the signal kept repeating, and with each broken syllable, his skin grew colder. Someone was out there. Someone was near. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle that lay beside him. The war had left behind more than ruins. It had left hunters, machines, and raiders that moved under the cover of night. He thought of traps, of tricks, of enemy drones trying to lure survivors into the open. But then he thought of the sound of that voice, so fragile it was almost breaking. That was not the sound of a machine. That was not a weapon. That was a plea. His lonely shelter felt smaller now, and the shadows pressed close against the weak firelight. He rose slowly, his eyes scanning the cracks in the broken wall. The night outside was wide and endless, but he felt that something or someone was watching. The radio hissed again, and the signal grew weaker, fading as if the sender was moving, stumbling through the dark. Daniel knew if he ignored it, the voice would vanish, swallowed by the empty world. He stood at the doorway of his shelter, staring into the ruins. Mind told him to stay hidden, to wait until daylight, but his heart beat harder, reminding him of all the nights he had prayed for another voice. At last he stepped outside, moving slow, his boots crunching on broken stone. The cold air bit at his face, and the night seemed to hold its breath as he listened. The signal was no longer in the radio. It was closer, carried on the wind like a whisper. Then he saw movement, a shadow, small and unsteady, slipping between the shattered walls of a burned-out home. Daniel froze, rifle raised, finger on the trigger. The shadow stumbled, then pressed itself against the wall as if hiding. He heard a faint gasp, like a sob carried in the stillness. Slowly, carefully, he crept closer. When he rounded the corner, he saw her. She was not human. Her skin was pale silver, glowing faintly under the stars. Her clothing was torn, her face marked with dirt and ash. She looked fragile but proud, even in her broken state. Her large eyes turned to him, wide with fear. And for a moment, they both stood frozen. Two survivors caught in the same silence. She lifted her hands slowly, shaking, and whispered in her tongue. Daniel could not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was begging him not to shoot. He lowered the rifle just a little, his breath heavy. He had heard of her Kindan alien race whose world had been torn apart by the same empire that had shattered his colony. He had heard that most of them were gone, killed or scattered across the stars. But here she was, one of the last. She looked young, but her eyes carried a deep sorrow, the kind that only came from great loss. And in that moment he knew. Was a widow, broken by war, carrying more grief than he could imagine. She staggered forward, almost falling, and her voice cracked with a single word in broken English. Shelter. That was all she said, but the way she said it carried more weight than 1,000 words. It was not just about walls or fire or food. It was about safety, about being seen, about not being left alone in the ruins of a dead world. Daniel felt his throat tighten because he knew that same need. He had lived in silence so long that he had almost become part of the ruins. Now here was someone reaching out, not with a weapon, but with open hands. But danger was never far in. The wastelands. As they stood in the dark, Daniel heard the faint hum of machines in the distance. Drones, searching, sweeping across the night for survivors. He glanced at the woman. She heard it too, and terror filled her eyes. She pressed closer, whispering again. Not for food, not for water, but for a chance to hide, to live. Daniel clenched. His rifle, his heart pounding. He had a choice to make. If he let her in, he might draw death upon himself. If he turned her away, she would not live until dawn. The night around them grew tighter, the hum of machines moving closer. The stars burned cold above, the ruins whispered with the memory of fire, and between them stood a lonely man and an alien widow bound by fear and silence. Daniel looked at her trembling hands, at the sorrow in her eyes, and in that moment, he felt something he thought he had lost forever, the weight of another life depending on his. He stepped forward, lowering his rifle. Come, he said, his voice rough from disuse. She understood enough. She followed him into the dark as the sound of drones crept nearer, hunting for them both. The shelter was nothing more than crumbling walls and a roof patched with scrap metal, but to Daniel, it was home. He had rebuilt it piece by piece after the colony's fall, turning ruins into a place where he could survive. Now, as he guided, the alien widow inside, the silence seemed heavier than before. The hum of enemy drones still echoed faintly outside, their searchlights sweeping across the broken horizon. He moved quickly, pulling a torn blanket across the doorway to block any glow from his fire. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and rust, but it was safer than the empty world beyond. The woman collapsed onto the floor near the fire, breathing hard, her silver skin streaked with dirt and her eyes full of exhaustion. Daniel stood over her, rifle still in his hands, torn between suspicion and pity. For months, he had lived alone, and solitude had been his shield. Strangers meant danger, and trust was a luxury he had forgotten. Now this alien widow sat in his shelter like a fragile shadow, asking for more than just shelter. He studied her carefully, his eyes scanning the strange lines of her face, the faint scars across her arms, the way she wrapped her torn cloak tightly around herself. She was not a soldier, but there was strength in her posture, even in her weakness. Daniel finally set his rifle against the wall and knelt by the fire. His voice was rough from silence. She lifted her gaze slowly as if weighing the risk of speaking. At first, she spoke in her own tongue, soft words that broke against the walls of the shelter like water against stone. He shook his head. Then, with effort, she formed broken English, her voice fragile but clear enough. Illyra, the name hung in the air, strange yet gentle. He repeated it, trying the sound on his tongue, and she gave the faintest nod. Then she looked at him, searching his face. You alone? He hesitated, then nodded. Her eyes softened, but her hands trembled as if she was holding something inside that words could not carry. The night stretched on, filled only with the crackle of fire and the faint whistle of wind. Daniel gave her a small flask of water, and she drank as if every drop was life itself. He handed her a strip of dried food, and though her kind had different customs, hunger pushed her to eat without question. She whispered something under her breath, a sound that might have been thanks, though he could not understand it. As she sat there, the weight of her loss was written all over her face. Her eyes carried the hollow look of someone who had seen her world burn. Daniel did not ask questions. He knew that look. He had seen it in his own reflection too many times, but silence could not last forever. The air outside vibrated again with the distant hum of engines. Daniel stiffened, moving to the wall, listening hard. Search drones were passing close. Lyra noticed too, her body going rigid, her breath shallow. She whispered something quickly in her own language, then switched to broken English. Hunt me. Her words hit him like a cold blade. She was not just another survivor, she was being hunted. And now, by letting her in, he was part of it. He turned to her sharply, anger mixing with fear. Why? Why are they looking for you? He demanded. Her eyes filled with something heavy: shame, sorrow, and fear. She shook her head, as if refusing to speak, but his stare pressed her. Finally, her voice cracked. It's because I know. She stopped, her lips trembling, and looked away. That was all she gave him. Just 2 words that opened more questions than answers. Daniel clenched his fists. He had let danger into his home. The Empire's machines tracked her here. His small fire, his little shelter, his fragile life would all be swept away in an instant. For the first time in months, he wished he had stayed alone. But as he looked at her, sitting there in the firelight, her face pale and her hands shaking, he also felt something else, a pull he did not want to admit. She was broken, yes, but she was alive. She had crossed the Deadlands alone, carrying nothing but desperation. He had seen men with weapons fall to despair far quicker. Yet here she was, still fighting to breathe, still searching for shelter. And beneath the dirt and ash, her eyes held something he thought he would never see again: hope, faint but real, like a spark refusing to die. The drones moved past, their engines fading into the night, leaving silence in their wake. Daniel slowly sat back down by the fire, his rifle never far from reach. Lyra's gaze followed him, her voice low. You not want me here? It was not a question, it was the truth she already knew. He sighed, rubbing his face with rough hands. Your trouble, he muttered. But even as he said it, he knew he could not throw her back into the dark. She looked too much like the last pieces of his own soul shattered, still clinging to life. The night dragged on, heavy and tense. Lyra curled against the wall, her cloak wrapped tightly, her eyes never fully closing. Daniel sat with the fire, watching her through the smoke. His mind screamed warnings, but his heart, buried deep under months of silence, whispered something else. He remembered the words she had spoken when she first found him shelter. It was not just about walls or warmth. It was about belonging, about trust, about not being alone. She wanted more than food and fire. She wanted someone to stand beside her, even when the sky was burning. Daniel knew he had not given her that yet. He was still holding her at a distance, still seeing her as a risk. But as the firelight danced across the broken walls, he realized something frightening. For the first time since the fall of the colony, he was not alone. And the thought of losing her was something he did not want to face. Outside, the world remained dark and dangerous, the Empire's hunters still sweeping across the land. Inside, 2 strangers sat across from each other, one human, one alien, both scarred by loss. They did not yet share trust, but they shared silence. And in that silence, something fragile began to form, like a seed in barren ground. Neither of them spoke, but both of them knew. Survival alone was no longer enough. Morning came slow, gray light spilling across the ruins like smoke. Daniel had not slept. He sat near the fire with his rifle resting across his knees, watching as the alien widow stirred in her sleep. Lyra shifted uneasily, caught between rest and nightmares, her face tightening as if shadows followed her, even here. When she finally opened her eyes, they were wet, though she made no sound. Daniel looked away, giving her the space to gather herself. He was not used to company, not used to the quiet weight of another person's sorrow filling his shelter. For years, the only ghosts he had carried were his own. Now hers had joined him. He stepped outside, scanning the horizon. The air was sharp, and cold and ash from the old battles still coated the earth. Beyond the broken towers of the colony, he could see faint trails and the dust marks left by patrol drones during the night. They were searching harder now, sweeping wider. Wherever this woman was, her presence had changed the pattern. They wanted her badly. Daniel cursed under his breath, his gut tight with unease. Bringing her inside had already tied his fate to hers. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, their lives were bound now. Inside, Lyra sat by the fire, her cloak wrapped around her shoulders. She looked at Daniel as he entered, her eyes heavy but steady. "You angry?" she said in her broken English. He did not answer right away. He poured a little water into a cracked tin cup and set it down in front of her. "You're being hunted," he said flatly. "They find you here, I'm finished too." His words were sharp, but beneath them was something else, fear. Not just anger. Lyra lowered her gaze, fingers clutching the cup, her silence answering more than words. Finally, she spoke. "I know things." Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried weight. Daniel frowned. "What kind of things?" For a long moment she hesitated, her throat tightening, her eyes flicking toward the doorway as if even the broken walls might betray her. Then she leaned closer. "My people, last war. They build something." The words broke and cracked, but the meaning reached him. She swallowed hard. "I only one left." "Who remember?" Daniel's chest went cold. A weapon. It had to be. His mind reeled with questions. What kind of weapon? Why she had it? Why she had survived when others had not? But all he saw in her face was torment, not pride. She did not look like someone clinging to power. She looked like someone carrying a burden too heavy to bear. He leaned back slowly, shaking his head. "And now they're chasing you to finish the job," he muttered. She met his gaze with sorrow in her eyes. Yes. The weight of her answer sat between them like a blade. Daniel turned away, rubbing his face. He had lived these years fighting only for himself, hiding, surviving. Now this widow had walked into his shelter carrying secrets that could light the sky on fire. The Empire was ruthless. They would burn entire cities just to silence one witness. And yet, here she was, not just alive, but sitting by his fire. He wanted to scream at her, to throw her out before she brought ruin on them both. But when he looked back, he saw her thin shoulders shaking, her hands gripping the cup like it was the last piece of her strength. She had lost her world, her people, her mate, and still the hunters came for her. For reasons he could not explain, his anger turned into something else. That day they stayed hidden. Daniel did not light the fire again after morning, afraid of smoke drawing attention. They ate in silence, small rations that would not last long with two mouths. Lyra spoke little, but sometimes her eyes drifted to him with questions she did not ask. Once, when he caught her staring, she looked away quickly. Shame touching her face, he realized she was waiting for him to make the choice, whether to send her away or keep her close. He gave no answer, not in words, but he did not open the door for her to leave either. By evening, the hum returned. The sound of drones moved. Across the ruined streets like vultures, Daniel pressed a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. They crouched low as a beam of light passed across the broken windows. The machines moved slow, patient, their sensors crawling over every stone. Lyra's breathing quickened, her body trembling. She closed her eyes, whispering something in her language, a prayer or a memory. Daniel shifted closer, rifle ready. Though the weapon would mean little if they were spotted, his pulse thundered as the light lingered on the wall. For a moment it seemed the drone would turn. Then, as quickly as it had come, it drifted on, leaving them in shadows once more. Lyra opened her eyes wide with terror, and Daniel saw tears glisten there. She had been ready to die. He felt something hard twist inside his chest. He had seen fear before, but hers carried a deeper wound. The fear of being the last, of dying with no one left to remember her people. Without thinking, he reached out. Placing a hand on her shoulder, she flinched, then froze, meeting his gaze. He said nothing, but the touch was enough. For the first time, she did not feel entirely alone. That night, as the ruins grew quiet again, Daniel sat awake. He stared at the faint glow of stars through the cracks in the roof. Shadows of war hung heavy in his mind. Lyra was more than just an unwanted guest now. She carried something far larger, something dangerous enough to draw death to them both, and yet he could not bring himself to cast her out. In her grief, he saw his own. In her loneliness, he felt his own heart ache. He had thought he wanted solitude, but now he feared it more than the hunters outside. Somewhere in the ruins, metal wings beat the air, and machines searched the night. But inside the fragile shelter, two survivors sat in silence, their fates now bound together by shadows and secrets. War was not done with either of them. It simply found new ground to burn. The ruins stretched for miles, silent bones of a world once full of voices. Daniel had not planned to leave the safety of his shelter so soon. But the truth was simple. Two people could not survive on his hidden rations for long. Food was running out, and staying in one place with enemy drones sweeping so close was asking for death. When dawn came, pale and colorless, he told Lyra they had to move. She did not argue. Her eyes were tired, but there was a quiet fire in them. She wrapped her torn cloak tighter around her shoulders, pulled the hood low, and followed him into the cold. They moved through broken streets and shattered towers. Every step echoed, every shadow carried threat. Daniel kept his rifle ready, his eyes scanning windows where raiders might hide. Lyra walked a little behind him, her silence heavy but watchful. Though she was not trained like a soldier, she carried herself with a survivor's instinct, always glancing over her shoulder, always listening for danger. The silence between them was uneasy, but something had shifted. They were no longer strangers sitting across a fire. Now they were walking together, each step a small act of trust. By midday they reached what had once been a supply hub. Crates lay scattered under fallen beams, and the smell of rust and ash clung to everything. Daniel motioned for her to wait. As he moved ahead, he crouched low, rifle raised, scanning the area. At first it seemed empty, just another graveyard of war. Then, from the far end of the plaza, he heard movement, metal scraping against stone. His muscles tensed. A group of mercenaries stepped out from the ruins, their armor pieced together from salvage, their weapons crude but deadly. Raiders, there were 6 of them, their eyes hard and cold, and when they spotted him, their faces twisted into grins. "Look at this," one of them growled, human rat still crawling in the dust. Daniel aimed his rifle, but he knew he was outnumbered. The mercenaries spread out, circling him like wolves. Then, one of them caught sight of Lyra, standing frozen in the shadows behind him. His grin widened. And he's got a prize. Alien stock. The Empire pays good for strays like her. Lyra's face went pale, her body trembling. Daniel's heart pounded as rage surged through him. The mercenaries stepped closer, weapons raised. He could feel Lyra's fear behind him, sharp and raw, but he did not step aside. For months, he had lived only for himself. Now in this moment, he stood between her and the men who would drag her away. The first mercenary lunged. Daniel's rifle barked, the shot echoing through the ruins. The man dropped, but the others charged, shouting. Daniel moved fast, firing again, ducking behind a shattered wall as bullets tore through the air. Lyra pressed against the stone, her breath fast, eyes wide with terror. He reloaded quickly, adrenaline burning through him. This was what humanity had been made to do, fight when there was no other choice. He fired again, his shot sharp and precise, dropping another man before rolling into cover. The mercenaries cursed, their confidence shaken by the lone human's ferocity. One of them rushed too close. Daniel swung the rifle like a club, smashing the butt into the man's face, then drove a knife into his side before shoving him away. Blood sprayed across the dust and the man crumpled.
Out.
Daniel's chest heaved as he turned back to the others. The mercenaries hesitated, eyes narrowing. They had expected prey, but they had found something else. Daniel's gaze was hard, his jaw set. He was no easy kill. He was a survivor forged by fire. The last 3 backed away, muttering curses. One spat at the ground. Not worth it. Let the Empire's hounds take them. They vanished into the ruins, leaving the dead behind. Silence fell again, broken only by Daniel's ragged breathing. He lowered his rifle, his hands trembling from the rush of battle. Slowly he turned to Lyra. She was staring at him, her silver eyes wide, not with fear but with shock. She had expected him to fall. Instead, he had fought like a storm, ruthless and unyielding. She stepped closer, her voice soft. Fight like them. Her words carried both awe and sorrow, as if his violence reminded her of the Empire's soldiers, but also gave her hope. Daniel wiped the blood from his blade, his expression hard. It's what we do, he said quietly. Then he met her gaze. That's why we're still here. They searched the crates quickly, finding a few sealed packs of food and some old medical supplies. It was not much, but it was enough to keep moving. As they sat in the ruins to catch their breath, Lyra finally spoke again, her voice trembling. You remind me. She paused, as if the words were too heavy. Daniel frowned. Remind you of what? Eyes lowered, her hands clutching her cloak. Of him, my mate. The words struck Daniel harder than any bullet. He saw the sorrow. In her face, the way her voice cracked when she spoke of the one she had lost. For a long moment, he said nothing, unsure of what to feel. He was not her mate, not her people, not her past. But she looked at him with something fragile in her eyes, something that saw more than just a man with a rifle. She saw a protector, a reminder that she was not completely abandoned. As the sun sank low, they prepared to move again. Lyra walked closer now, no longer trailing behind. Daniel felt her presence at his side, steady despite the weight of grief. Together they crossed the ruins, shadows stretching long before them. For the first time since she had entered his life, Daniel realized something had changed. They were no longer two broken souls, walking separately. They were bound by survival, by danger, and by a fragile trust that had begun to form in blood and fire above them. In the darkening sky, the Empire's war machines moved like distant predators, their engines humming as they searched. And below, in the ruins, a lonely human and an alien widow walked together, strangers no longer, their fates now tied. The ruins grew quieter as night fell again, but Daniel could not rest. He and Lyra had taken shelter inside the broken frame of an old transport hub, its roof half collapsed, its walls scarred with fire. The battle with the mercenaries earlier still echoed in his body. His hands ached from gripping the rifle. His arms were heavy, and his chest still burned with the rush of violence. But it was not the fight that haunted him now. It was Lyra's eyes when she spoke of her mate. She sat across the fire from him, her cloak wrapped tight, her silver skin faintly glowing in the dim light. She looked both strong and fragile at once, her shoulders straight but her hands trembling. She had carried herself through wastelands alone, survived the Empire's hunts. And yet now she seemed weighed down by something even greater than fear. Daniel had noticed it since the beginning, the way she hesitated before speaking, the way her gaze shifted whenever he asked why the Empire wanted her so badly. Night he decided silence could not last. You've been running, Daniel? Said quietly, breaking the long stillness. His voice was low, but it cut through the dark. Not just from raiders, not just from drones, from something bigger. What is it? Lyra froze, her eyes dropping to the flames. For a long time, she said nothing, as if deciding whether the truth was worse than the silence. Then her lips parted, her words trembling but clear. People. They try to fight Empire. Long ago, not with ships, not with soldiers, with science. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to go on. They build a weapon, a terrible one. One that could break fleets, burn cities from sky. Daniel's chest tightened. His fears had been right. He leaned closer, his jaw set. And you know how it works. Her eyes lifted slowly to his, shimmering with pain. Gosh. Yes, I was not soldier. I was. Scientist mate, I listen, I learn. I remember codes, patterns, access. When Empire come, they kill him, kill all. But her voice faltered, and she pressed a hand to her chest as if holding back grief too deep to speak. Survive, and now I am last. The fire snapped softly between them, but the weight of her words was heavier than the ruins around them. Daniel stared at her, the reality crashing down like stone. She was not just a widow wandering through the ashes. She was the final keeper of a weapon so dangerous the Empire would scour whole worlds to erase it. That was why the drones hunted her. That was why mercenaries prowled the ruins. If she lived, their Empire was not safe. Daniel's instincts screamed at him. This woman was not just a risk, she was a beacon of death. Every step with her was pulling him closer to the Empire's wrath. His whole survival had been built on staying hidden, on avoiding notice. And now he sat across the fire from the very thing the enemy wanted most. He should have left her when he had the chance, should have walked away. But when his eyes met hers, he saw something else. She was not boasting of power. She was not proud of the knowledge she carried. She was broken by it. Her hands shook, her breath trembled, her voice carried only sorrow. She had not asked for this burden, had been forced on her when the Empire slaughtered everyone else. And now, all she wanted was what she had begged for on the night they met. Shelter. Not walls, not food. Shelter in the form of another living soul who would not let her fall. "You think about leaving me?" she whispered suddenly, as if she had read his thoughts. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "I see it in your face. You want me gone?" Daniel clenched his fists, anger at himself rising. "Don't understand what this means. You're carrying something that could burn everything left in this sector. If they know you're alive, they'll never stop. Not until everything is gone." "I know," she said softly. Her voice cracked, and tears finally rolled down her cheeks. "Every night I think, maybe I end it. Maybe I walk into fire, into drones, into death. But then," she swallowed hard, her words shaking. "Then I hear him, my mate, his voice in memory. He say, 'Live, even if I cannot. Live, because our people must be remembered.' And so I walk, alone, until you." Daniel stared at her, his chest heavy. He had seen many kinds of grief, but this was different. She was not clinging to hope of victory. She was clinging to the smallest ember of memory, refusing to let it die. And in her broken plea, he saw himself his own ghosts, his own reasons for surviving when he should have given up. He moved his hand to the rifle, not to raise it, but to rest it across his lap. His voice was low but steady. "So what now? You want me to help you build this weapon? You want me to help you destroy everything?" She shook her head quickly, her tears falling faster. "No, I want you to choose. Help me keep it hidden. Help me make sure Empire never find it. Or help me end it, destroy it forever. I cannot do alone. I am not strong enough." Daniel leaned back slowly, his mind torn. He had spent years running, hiding from war, keeping only himself alive. This widow was asking him for more than survival. She was asking him to take part in something that could change the balance of everything. He looked at her, trembling in the firelight, her eyes full of pain but also trust. She had carried her, secret through the ruins of war. But now she had placed it in his hands. The fire burned low, shadows stretching long across the cracked walls. Outside, the night hummed faintly with the engines of distant hunters. Inside, Daniel sat across from Lyra, their eyes locked. Between them lay not just survival, but a choice that could decide the fate of more than just their broken lives. Had asked him for shelter, now she was asking for something greater, to stand beside her, to share her burden, to help her live when everything else had been lost. For a long time Daniel said nothing, but in the silence, a fragile bond deepened, one that no empire could erase. The sky above the ruined world was no longer quiet. It was torn apart by light, by sound, by the scream of engines and the thunder of guns. The human stood on the shattered ridge with his rifle in his hands, the alien widow beside him, her long cloak whipping in the wind as the first wave of the Empire's ships descended. For days they had hidden, for nights they had run, but now there was nowhere left. The enemy had come, not with a few scouts or searching drones, but with a fleet, meant to erase everything her, him, and the last whisper of her people's memory. He could see the lines of fire streaking down from orbit, each one a carrier unloading destruction. He knew then what she had meant when she said the Empire would never allow her to live. They feared her truth, and they feared what she carried. The ground shook as the first impact hit the plains below. Dust rose like a wall of smoke. From the shadows of broken towers came the shriek of soldiers in metal armor, their claws striking the ground as they advanced. The human clenched his rifle, tighter, and glanced at the widow. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, filled with fire yet softened by the fear of loss. She turned to him and whispered that this was the end. He shook his head. "No," he said, his voice low but unbroken. "This is where we fight." Could feel his heart pounding in his chest. every beat louder than the war outside. The widow lifted a small device from her belt, the one she had guarded with her life. The weapon's control core. The secret that had drawn death upon them. She held it out as if weighing its worth, then closed her hand again. "They want this," she said, "but they cannot have it." The battle began with a roar. Enemy wave reached the ruins, blasters lighting the night, and the human fired back. Each shot precise, each echo louder than the last. The widow stood beside him, her staff igniting with energy, cutting through armored soldiers that dared to come close. For a moment, in the fire and chaos, they looked like warriors from another age, one human, one alien, but fighting as one. The Empire's troops kept coming, wave after wave, and still they held. Blood stained the earth, smoke filled the air, but neither stepped back. The widow screamed her rage, the sound carrying across the battlefield like the cry of someone who had lost everything, yet refused to surrender. The human fought silently, his eyes fixed, his hands steady. Every movement the mark of someone who had nothing left to fear. Above them, the sky cracked open. A massive battleship broke through the clouds, its shadow covering the land, its cannons charging with deadly light. The widow's face hardened. "Time," she said, her voice shaking not from fear, but from the weight of her choice. She lifted the core, and suddenly the ground itself seemed to react. Deep beneath the ruins, machinery long buried began to stir. The secret weapon of her people, the last creation before their destruction, awoke. The human felt the earth tremble, as towers of metal pushed through the surface, rising like spears to meet the Empire's fleet. He realized then that she had not lied. She carried the codes, and now the weapon was alive because of her. The Empire's ships opened fire, raining down light, but the ancient weapon answered. Bolts of pure energy tore into the sky, striking the enemy vessels with a fury that shook the heavens. One by one, ships fell, crashing in burning wrecks across the plains. The human stared in awe, his rifle forgotten for a heartbeat. As the impossible happened, the Empire was bleeding. The widow's face was lit by the glow, her tears mixing with the dust on her skin. Gosh. She whispered that this was her people's final gift, but also their curse. For the weapon would not stop. It was built to destroy everything, friend or foe, till the sky was empty. He grabbed her hand, pulling her back as the ground split around them. "Shut it down," shouted, his voice almost lost in the thunder. But she shook her head. "Cannot," she cried. "It was never made to end." The human's heart raced. He realized then that this was not a weapon that could be controlled. It was vengeance, pure and blind. If left unchecked, it would burn until nothing remained, not the Empire, not the ruins, not even them. The widow fell to her knees, the core trembling in her hands. She looked at him, her eyes filled with grief. "I wanted shelter," she said softly, "not this." Her words cut deeper than the battle around them, for he understood she had never wanted war again. She had wanted to live, to heal, to find something beyond pain. The human knelt beside her, his hand closing over hers. "Then we end it," he said. His voice was steady, his eyes locked on hers. She nodded slowly, and together they pressed their hands to the core. The weapon roared in fury, the sky tearing open as if the stars themselves were screaming, but then the glow began to fade. The towers cracked, the light dimmed, and the earth swallowed the machine once more. Silence spread over the battlefield, broken only by the distant thunder of retreating ships. The Empire, wounded and afraid, pulled back into the clouds, leaving fire in their wake but no victory. When it was over, the human and the widow stood alone among the ruins, the ground scorched, the sky torn, but alive. They had stopped the weapon, they had driven back the Empire, but at a cost. The widow sank to the ground, her strength spent, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the last enemy ship disappeared. "It is not over," she whispered. "They will return." The human crouched beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Then we'll be ready," he said. His voice was calm, but inside he knew the truth. The Empire would never stop hunting them. Yet for now, for this night, they had won. The wind blew across the battlefield, carrying the scent of smoke and ash, but also the sound of quiet. The widow looked at the human, her face marked by loss, but softened by something new hope. "When I asked you for shelter," she said slowly, her voice breaking, "I thought I meant walls. But now I know I meant you." Her words hung in the air, heavier than the ruins, stronger than the silence. The human did not answer at first. He only held her gaze, and in that look was everything he could not: loneliness broken, trust found, and a bond forged in fire. Above them, stars slowly returned, shining through the smoke. The empire was gone, the weapon was buried, but the war was not finished. Still in that moment, standing together in the ruins of a dead world, a lonely human and an alien widow had found what neither had expected: shelter, not in walls, but in each other. And so they walked forward into the ashes of tomorrow, not knowing what battles would come, but knowing they would not face them alone.